the Hells Angels biker heard the little girl whisper, "Is this where you're from?" And his next move split the past open. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. On a quiet street, far from the noise and chaos of the city, a Hells Angels biker named Jake sat on his motorcycle, the engine humming beneath him. The evening sky was painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun began to set, casting a calm, almost eerie glow across the neighborhood. Jake was used to the silence. He often found solace in it, a rare moment of peace after the endless battles, both physical and emotional, that had marked his life. He had seen it all: violence, betrayal, loss. But tonight, something felt different. As he slowly rolled his bike down the street, a soft whisper broke through the stillness. "Is this where you're from?" The voice was high-pitched, almost like a breeze, yet it cut through the air like a sharp knife. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. He looked around, scanning the street, his eyes narrowing. In the distance, near the corner of the sidewalk, a little girl stood. She was alone, her small figure silhouetted against the fading light. Her wide, innocent eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, Jake felt a sense of unease. He had dealt with hundreds of people in his life, but there was something about this girl that unsettled him. His instincts told him to keep riding, to avoid getting involved. But something held him back. He slowed his bike, the engine's growl softening. The girl took a cautious step forward. "Are you one of them?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. Jake felt a strange pull in his chest. The them she referred to was the Hells Angels. To most people, the name sent a chill down their spine. To Jake, it was his family, his identity. But hearing it from her lips, spoken with such purity, made him question everything. He took off his helmet and approached her slowly, his boots crunching softly on the pavement. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice gentler than he expected. The girl hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "Emma," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you a bad guy?" Jake stopped in his tracks. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't used to being asked about his morality, especially not by a child. He had always lived by his own code, a code shaped by years in the gang. But in that moment, looking at Emma, he realized how far he had drifted from the man he used to be. He crouched down to her level, his hands resting on his knees. "I'm not a bad guy," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. Emma seemed to study him for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to trust him. Finally, she spoke again. "My grandma says you bikers are bad, but I think you're just lonely." Jake's heart tightened. No one had ever put it that way. He had always seen himself as tough, hardened by the years of riding and fighting. But Emma's words cracked through the tough exterior he had spent so long building. The little girl wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't running away, even though she had every reason to be. Instead, she saw past his scars, his tattoos, and the Hells Angels patch. She saw something he had long forgotten, his humanity. "I'm not lonely," Jake said, his voice firm but with a hint of vulnerability he couldn't hide. "I just don't know how to be anything else." Emma stepped closer, her small hand reaching out toward him. "I think you can be good," she said softly. Jake stood up slowly, his mind racing. The past, with all its mistakes and regrets, was never far behind him. But Emma's innocent trust stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. As he turned to leave, Emma called out to him, her voice small but full of hope. "Will you come back?" Jake didn't answer right away, but deep down, he knew this moment would haunt him. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to stop, to listen to her whisper. But something told him that this little girl was about to change his life forever. "I don't know how long I can hold on to my life." But when I saw her standing there, looking at me with such innocence, I felt something inside me that I thought was long buried. I had been a Hell's Angel for most of my life, surrounded by violence, betrayal, and regret. But Emma, this little girl, reminded me of the simple things I'd lost, the trust, the hope, the goodness in the world. That one simple question she asked, "Is this where you're from?" echoed in my mind. I had thought I knew who I was. But maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong all along. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a pull to return to her, to make sure she was safe. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment my life was about to change. Fast forward to the next day, and the memory of Emma's face still haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about her, something I couldn't ignore. She was just a child, yet her gaze felt like it cut through all the tough layers I had built around myself. It was like she saw something in me that I had long forgotten. I had to go back. The next morning, I found myself at the edge of the same street. The sun had barely risen, and the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. I knew she lived somewhere around here, but I didn't know where. My fingers tightened around the handlebars of my motorcycle, my heart pounding a little faster. I wasn't afraid. No, it was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. I parked my bike at the end of the street and started walking toward her house. As I approached, I saw the same porch she had stood on the day before, the one where she had whispered her question. The door creaked open, and there she was, Emma. She was standing in front of the door, her small frame outlined against the soft morning light. She looked at me for a moment, as if wondering whether I would actually show up. But then, a small smile spread across her face. "You came back," she said, her voice quiet but full of surprise. "I didn't think you would." I knelt down in front of her, my knees creaking as I did. I looked into her eyes, those innocent, unguarded eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something break open inside me, something that had been locked away for years. "I promised I would," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You okay?" She nodded. "Grandma says you're a biker, but I don't think you're a bad guy." Her words hit me harder than I expected. A biker, a bad guy. Those words had followed me for most of my life. But hearing them from Emma, in such a pure, unjudging way, made me rethink everything. "I'm not a bad guy," I said softly, my voice faltering. I didn't know why I was telling her this, but something about her made me want to be honest. She looked at me for a long moment, her small face serious. "I think you're just lost," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Lost. That's how I had felt for so many years. I had lost my way, lost the man I used to be. But standing here, talking to her, I felt like I was starting to find a way back. We sat on the porch together, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her school, about her love for animals, about her dreams of becoming a doctor one day. I didn't know why, but I listened intently. Maybe because I felt like I had never really been listened to. As the conversation went on, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't a big, dramatic feeling, but it was there, like a small flame flickering in the darkness. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this life I had built. Maybe it wasn't too late to change. "Do you think I can be good?" I asked her quietly, the words coming out before I even realized I was saying them. She smiled, that same innocent smile that had disarmed me the first time. "I know you can," she said simply. "I think everyone can be good. You just have to try." Her words stayed with me as I left her house that day. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Emma had just opened a door inside me that I didn't even know existed. A door to something better, something worth fighting for. As I started my bike and pulled away, I couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something new. Something that, for the first time in years, felt like hope. The next few days felt like a blur. Jake found himself going back to Emma's house every chance he got, each visit feeling like he was slowly finding the person he used to be. It was a strange, quiet kind of peace that settled over him when he was around her. Emma had a way of making everything feel simpler, even when life outside seemed so complicated. She asked him questions, listened to his stories, and never judged. In her small, unassuming way, she made him feel like maybe he wasn't beyond redemption. On the fourth day, Jake found himself sitting on her porch again, the setting sun painting the sky in colors that reminded him of the calm he'd been craving for so long. Emma sat beside him, her tiny legs swinging off the edge of the step as she munched on a cookie. It had become their routine. Jake would show up in the evening, and they would sit together, sharing stories. The bond between them was growing stronger each day, and Jake couldn't deny the sense of purpose it was giving him. "You know, I've been thinking," Jake said, his voice low as he stared out into the distance. "I used to think I was nothing but a bad guy, that there was no way out." Emma didn't respond immediately, just watched him with those wise eyes of hers, as if she understood more than a 7-year-old should. She broke the silence with a soft question. Do you still think you're a bad guy? Jake sighed deeply. Sometimes. But I don't know anymore. You made me think differently. Emma smiled, her small hand reaching for his. You're not a bad guy, she said firmly, as though it was the simplest truth in the world. You're just someone who needs to be found. The words hit Jake harder than he expected. It was a simple statement, but in that moment, it felt like she had just peeled back the layers of his soul and exposed the truth. He had been lost for so long, searching for meaning in a life that seemed to revolve around pain, anger, and the endless pursuit of something that could never be found. But Emma, this little girl with her unshakable belief in him, had shown him that maybe he could be more than the man he had become. Just then, the sound of engines revving in the distance broke their peaceful moment. Jake's ears perked up, a familiar, unsettling feeling washing over him. He stood up and walked toward the edge of the yard, squinting into the distance. The unmistakable roar of motorcycles filled the air. Emma stood beside him, her innocent gaze following his. What's that sound? She asked, her voice full of curiosity. Jake didn't answer right away. The noise grew louder, closer. His mind was racing. He knew those bikes. They belonged to the men he used to call family, the Hells Angels. They were here, and Jake knew it wasn't just a social visit. He turned to Emma, his face hardening. Stay inside, he said, his voice low and urgent. Emma's eyes widened. Why? Who are they? Just stay inside, Jake repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. She hesitated but nodded, disappearing inside the house. Jake took a deep breath and started walking toward the driveway. The motorcycles were now right outside, the roar of their engines vibrating through his chest. A group of 5 bikers pulled up, their leather jackets and patches familiar and intimidating. They dismounted, their eyes scanning the area. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. Jake, he said in a gravelly voice. You've been hiding, huh? Jake's stomach tightened. He knew this man. This was Steele, the president of the Redwood chapter. Steele was not a man you could simply walk away from. He had always been about loyalty, and Jake had broken that loyalty when he left. I'm not hiding, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm just done. Steele chuckled darkly. You think you can just walk away from the club, from the life? You know that's not how it works. Jake stepped forward, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. I don't want any part of it anymore. I'm not that guy. Steele's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. Jake felt his heart racing. He knew what this meant. They weren't here for a chat. They were here to remind him of the price of betrayal. As Steele took a step closer, Jake felt the tension build in the air. He was cornered. But just as Steele opened his mouth to speak, Emma's voice called out from the door. Jake. The soft, innocent question cut through the tension like a knife. Jake froze. He turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her small figure framed by the dim light from inside. Are you okay? She asked, her voice filled with concern. In that moment, everything stopped. The bikers, the tension, the past, none of it mattered. It was just him and Emma. And for the first time in years, Jake knew exactly what he had to do. He turned to Steele, his decision made. I'm done, he said firmly, his voice unwavering. I'm done with all of this. Steele's face darkened, but he said nothing. With a snort of contempt, he turned and walked back to his bike, the others following silently. As they rode off, Jake took a deep breath, the weight lifting off his shoulders. He had made his choice. He wasn't going back. Not for the club. Not for anyone. He turned to Emma, his face softening as he walked toward her. She looked up at him with those trusting eyes, and for the first time in his life, Jake felt like maybe he could live up to the man she believed him to be. I walked back to Emma, my legs heavy with a weight I hadn't felt in years. The sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance, but I knew that it wasn't over. Not really. The world I had left behind had a way of catching up with you, even when you thought you could escape. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually running towards something good. Emma was standing there, her little face full of hope, her eyes bright and full of trust. I had no idea how I'd gotten so lucky, how this small girl had managed to see past the scars, the tattoos, the years of violence, and find the man I used to be. She wasn't afraid of me. She didn't see the Hell's Angel in me. She saw Jake, the man who could still be something better. I knelt in front of her, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Are you okay? She asked softly, her small hand reaching out to touch my arm. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure I was. I wasn't sure I'd ever be okay again. But I knew this. I wasn't alone anymore. And that was a damn good start. Yeah, I said, my voice rough. I'm okay. Thanks to you. Emma smiled, and that smile did something to me. It wasn't just a smile. It was hope. It was the promise of something better. And for a guy like me, that was more than I could ask for. That night, I went home, not to the old house where the smell of gasoline and old leather clung to the walls, but to the garage. I hadn't expected to feel a sense of belonging there, but it was the only place that felt right. It wasn't just the motorcycles, the smell of grease, or the old tools strewn across the workbench. It was the quiet, the calm. I had forgotten what peace felt like. It had been so long since I'd allowed myself to feel anything other than anger and regret. I walked into the back room where Emma had stayed the other day, and I sat down on the old couch in the corner. The walls were bare, except for a couple of old photos of me with my old crew, faces I'd left behind. I hadn't realized how much I missed the silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel like a trap, but like an opportunity. It was a gift I didn't deserve, but I'd take it. I hadn't really realized it before, but in the last few days, Emma had given me more than I could ever give her. She had given me the chance to be something better, and I wasn't about to throw that away. I got up and walked back to the front of the garage, looking at the motorcycle I had been working on before everything had changed. I ran my fingers along the handlebars, the metal cool against my skin. It was a beautiful machine, but it wasn't just about the bike anymore. It was about what I could do with it. The roar of the engine had always been a way to drown out the noise in my head, but now, it was a way to move forward. I wasn't sure where the road would take me, but I knew that for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away. I was going somewhere. The next day, I woke up with a new purpose. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but it was there. It started with small things. Helping Emma with her homework. Listening to her stories about her day at school. I found myself laughing at the silly things she said, the way she could make anything seem interesting. She had this way of making the world feel like a place worth fighting for. And I wasn't about to let that go. By the end of the week, I was starting to see the world through her eyes. It wasn't all bad. There was beauty in the little things, like the way the sun hit the trees in the afternoon, or the way Emma's laughter filled the air, a sound so pure it made me want to hold on to it forever. But I knew that trouble was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I hadn't heard from Steele or the others, but I knew they wouldn't let me go so easily. I wasn't sure how long I could keep this peaceful life going, but for the first time in ages, I wasn't afraid of what was coming. Emma had taught me that there was more to life than the past, and for the first time, I believed it. The phone rang late that night. It was Steele. "We need to talk," his voice said, rough and unyielding. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything crashing down. I wasn't ready for this, but I wasn't going to back down either. Not anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. "I'll be there," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. As I hung up the phone, I glanced at the garage door. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. It was time to face the past. With Emma by my side, maybe, just maybe, I could finally change my future. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone as if it held the answers to everything I had been running from. Steele's voice echoed in my mind, steady and forceful, demanding that I face what I had left behind. I knew this moment was coming. You can't walk away from a life like mine without expecting consequences. But now, standing in the quiet of the garage, the weight of it all felt heavier than I anticipated. I wasn't just facing the men I used to call brothers. I was facing myself, the man I had been, the man I thought I could never escape. But this time, there was something different. I wasn't alone anymore. Emma had shown me a side of myself I had buried deep. She had made me see that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doomed to repeat the same mistakes. I didn't know how long I could keep running, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I grabbed my jacket, throwing it on with a sense of finality, and headed out the door. The night air hit me like a punch as I stepped outside, the cool breeze cutting through the tension in my chest. The streets were quiet, the world still and waiting. As I made my way to my bike, my mind raced. I had left that world behind. Or at least, I thought I had. Steele's call had changed everything. I fired up the engine, the roar of the bike filling the silence, and headed out. I didn't know what to expect when I reached the meeting spot. All I knew was that I couldn't let the past dictate my future. I wasn't the man I had been. Not anymore. The ride felt like an eternity. The wind whipped around me as I sped through the empty streets, my thoughts spinning faster than the wheels beneath me. I couldn't help but think of Emma. Her innocent belief in me had made me want to believe in myself. She had no idea what I had done, what I had been a part of. But she didn't need to. She saw the good in me. And that was enough to make me want to be better. When I finally pulled up to the old warehouse, the familiar chill of fear crept back into my bones. The place was dark, the only light coming from the headlights of a few motorcycles parked out front. Steele's bike was in the front, just like I knew it would be. I took a deep breath, killing the engine, and stepped off my bike. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance as I approached the door. Steele and the others were waiting for me. As I walked into the warehouse, I could feel their eyes on me. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. Steele stood by the far wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The others were scattered around the room, watching me like I was a man on trial. I could feel the weight of their judgment. I wasn't one of them anymore. Not in the way I had been. But I wasn't going to let them make me feel small. I was done being afraid. You think you can just walk away? Steele's voice broke the silence, his tone cold, like a blade ready to strike. I looked him in the eyes, refusing to back down. I'm not walking away, I said, my voice steady. I'm just done with the life you're all living. Steele smirked, taking a step forward. You don't get to make that choice, Jake. He used my real name. It was a reminder that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to change, the past was always going to be there, waiting to pull me back. I'm making this choice, I said, my fists clenched at my sides. I'm done with you. Done with this. And I'm done with the Hells Angels. Steele's eyes narrowed, the weight of his gaze burning into me. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, that he might do something to remind me of who I used to be. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, silent. The other bikers watched us, their faces unreadable. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick. Finally, Steele spoke again. You think you can just walk away, and everything will be fine? You think Emma will save you? The name hit me like a punch in the gut. Leave her out of this, I said, my voice low but firm. Steele smirked again. You really think she's going to be safe with you? You think you can just leave the life behind, and everything will be perfect? You're not that guy, Jake. You never will be. His words stung, but they didn't have the power they once did. I was no longer that man. I wasn't the monster he wanted me to be. I was something different, something better. I don't need you to tell me who I am, I said, taking a step closer to him. I know who I am, and I'm not that man anymore. Steele stared at me for a long moment, his eyes hard. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked toward the door. The others followed him, each one giving me a final, assessing look before leaving. I stood there in the silence, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The past was gone. The choice had been made. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. And no one could take that from me. As I turned to leave, I couldn't help but think of Emma. She had given me something no one else ever had, the chance to be someone better. And no matter what happened next, I wasn't going to let her down. I stood in the aftermath of my decision, the silence of the warehouse pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Steele and the others had left, but their presence still lingered, a constant reminder of the world I had once been part of. I didn't know how much longer I could stay away from that life, but at that moment, I wasn't going back. The doors had closed behind me, and I had no intention of reopening them. I climbed onto my bike, the engine roaring to life beneath me. As I pulled out of the parking lot and hit the open road, I felt a strange sense of freedom, but it wasn't the same kind of freedom I'd always chased. It wasn't about running away anymore. It was about moving forward. The road stretched out before me, empty and wide, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't thinking about the past, the mistakes, the men I had left behind. I was focused on the now. I was focused on Emma. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had to make sure she was safe. I wasn't sure who or what was still after me, but I wasn't going to risk her getting hurt because of me. My mind raced as I drove, the wind rushing past me, filling my thoughts with uncertainty and fear. But as I passed familiar landmarks, as the miles stretched out behind me, I felt something shift inside me. The uncertainty didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like possibility. I reached Emma's house just as the sun was setting. The sky was painted with hues of orange and purple, the colors spilling over the horizon like a canvas. I parked my bike in front of her house, the engine rumbling as I shut it off. I walked up the steps, my boots heavy against the wood, and knocked on the door. A moment later, Emma's grandmother, Rose, opened it. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes softening as she saw the determination in my face. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. "I need to talk to Emma," I said, my voice low but firm. Rose stepped aside, and I entered the house, the familiar scent of baked bread and tea filling the air. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, her feet swinging beneath her as she hummed softly to herself. She looked up when I entered, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Jake," she said, her voice full of excitement. But there was a hint of concern in her eyes as well. She could tell something was different. "Hey, Emma," I said, trying to smile, but the weight of everything pressing down on me made it hard. "I need to talk to you about something important." She nodded, her face serious now. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice small and full of concern. I pulled out the chair and sat down across from her. "I've made a decision," I began, taking a deep breath. "I'm not going back to the club, Emma. I'm not going back to that life." Emma's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. She just watched me, her small hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I know I've hurt a lot of people," I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "I've made mistakes, a lot of them, but I'm trying to change. For you. For me. I want to be better." Emma sat there quietly for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "I think you can be better," she said softly, her words simple but carrying more weight than I had ever expected. "I believe in you." I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't deserve her belief. I didn't deserve her trust. But in that moment, I realized something. She was giving me a chance to prove I could change. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was worth that chance. "I'm not perfect," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm going to try." Emma smiled at me, that same smile that had pulled me out of the darkness, and I felt a warmth spread through me. "That's all that matters," she said, her voice full of certainty. I sat there with her for a while, talking about everything and nothing. It was a quiet, peaceful kind of conversation, the kind I had always wanted but never thought I could have. As the night fell and the house grew quiet, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was here. I was with Emma. And for the first time, I knew that maybe, just maybe, I could build a new life. A life that wasn't defined by the past, but by the choices I made now. The next day, I went back to the garage, the one place that had always felt like home. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let the past control me anymore. I was ready to move forward. I was ready to be the man I was meant to be. I woke up early the next morning, the weight of the day ahead pressing down on me. I had made the decision to change, to leave behind the world that had defined me for so long. But the truth was, it wasn't going to be easy. The men I once called brothers weren't going to let me walk away without consequences. The phone had been quiet since that night at the warehouse, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. As I sat at the workbench in the garage, the steady rhythm of my tools hitting metal felt oddly comforting. It was the one thing that had always been a constant in my life, fixing things, making things right. But today, it felt different. I wasn't just fixing a bike, I was fixing myself. The sound of a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, pulling me out of the focused state I had been in. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the door, wondering who it could be. As I opened it, I was greeted by Emma, standing there with a concerned look on her face. "Jake, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Her presence always had a way of calming the storm inside me. I smiled at her, trying to ease her worries. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just working on something." She hesitated for a moment, then took a step inside, glancing at the bikes lined up against the wall. "You've been spending a lot of time here," she said softly. "Are you sure you're not running away again?" I paused, the question hitting me harder than I expected. It wasn't the first time I had thought about running. I had always been good at running from my problems, running from my past. But Emma was right. Running wasn't the answer. "No," I said, turning to face her. "I'm not running anymore. I'm staying." Her face softened, and she stepped closer, her small hand reaching for mine. "I believe you," she said quietly. "But you have to face them, right?" I nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I do." We stood there for a moment, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between us. Emma had always been wise beyond her years, and I could see it in her eyes, the understanding that I had to face the past if I wanted to build a future. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'll be okay," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. "I just need to do what's right." Emma gave me a small smile, the kind that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be the man she believed me to be. After she left, I sat in the garage for a while longer, the tools in front of me, the bikes waiting to be fixed, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't sure how things were going to play out. The club, the life I had left behind, they weren't going to just forget about me. But I had made my choice, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a prisoner to it. The decision I had made wasn't just about leaving the Hells Angels. It was about becoming something better. The sound of a motorcycle engine roared in the distance, and my heart skipped a beat. I stood up, wiping my hands on my pants, and walked outside to see who it was. As I looked down the street, I saw the familiar figure of Steele's bike pulling up. My stomach twisted in knots as he parked it in front of the garage. I didn't have to look at his face to know what this was about. Steele was here for answers. I took a deep breath and walked toward him, my mind already preparing for the confrontation. Steele dismounted his bike, his leather jacket creaking as he stood. He didn't speak right away, just watched me with a hard look in his eyes. "You think you can just walk away?" he asked finally, his voice low and full of anger. I met his gaze, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not walking away, Steele. I'm just done with this life." Steele scoffed, shaking his head. "You think you can just leave and everything's going to be fine? You think you can just walk away from the club?" He took a step closer, his face inches from mine. "You don't get to do that, Jake. Not without consequences." I stood my ground, my fists clenched at my sides. "I made my choice. You don't control me anymore." There was a long silence, the tension thick in the air. Steele studied me, his eyes cold and calculating. Then, with a grunt of frustration, he took a step back. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, turning to leave. "We'll see each other again, Jake. You can't escape this." I watched him walk away, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. But I didn't feel fear. Not anymore. The life I had left behind wasn't going to control me. Not now. Not ever again. I walked back to the garage, my mind racing, but something inside me felt lighter. I had faced Steele. I had faced my past. And I had made my decision. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to walk it. For the first time in my life, I was ready to face what came next. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my bike idling outside the garage, the deep rumble filling the quiet space. The air was crisp, the kind of chilly morning that made you want to pull your jacket tighter, but also the kind of air that made you feel alive. I stretched, letting the remnants of the night's tension slip away. I had faced Steele, told him what I needed to say, and though he'd walked away with his threats hanging in the air, I felt a strange kind of peace settle in me. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't that angry, reckless person. I was different now, but the fear still lingered. The Hells Angels weren't just going to let me go. I had made my decision to leave, but that didn't mean they would respect it. They never respected anything but power and loyalty. I had neither now. The thought of Emma lingered, a constant reminder of why I had made this choice. I couldn't let her get caught up in the mess I had left behind. She deserved better than that. I grabbed my jacket, zipped it up, and headed outside, taking a moment to look at the quiet street. I had made it this far, and I wasn't turning back now. The road ahead was uncertain, but the road behind was full of things I didn't want to relive. I was done with that life. I fired up the bike, the engine's roar cutting through the morning silence. The wind rushed past me as I headed out, the familiar hum of the engine beneath me comforting in a way I hadn't expected. As much as I had tried to leave behind the Hells Angels, the bike was still a part of me. I still felt connected to it in a way that nothing else could replace. The road stretched out before me, long and open, the endless possibilities of the future waiting. I wasn't running away anymore. I was just moving forward. It wasn't long before I reached the outskirts of town, where the houses started to thin out and the land opened up. The world felt bigger out here, quieter, almost as if I could breathe again. The noise and chaos of the past seemed far away. I pulled over by a small diner on the side of the road. I didn't need food, but I needed to think. I parked the bike and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the familiar smell of fresh coffee and eggs hit me. It was a small place, the kind of diner where the waitress knew your name even if you had never been there before. I slid into a booth by the window, looking out at the road as if it held the answers. The waitress came over with a smile, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice soft and kind. "Just coffee," I said, nodding. "Black, please." She nodded and walked off, and I leaned back in the booth, staring out at the passing cars. I wasn't sure where I was headed next. The life I had left behind wasn't something you could just walk away from. Steele was right about that. I had left the club, but the club didn't just leave you. They made sure you knew who was still in control. The decision I had made had consequences, but I had to believe it was the right one. I had to believe I wasn't doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over. I had to believe in something, anything. The waitress came back with my coffee, and I thanked her quietly. I took a sip, the warmth of the drink settling in my chest. The taste wasn't bad, but it wasn't what I was thinking about. My mind was back on Emma. She had shown me that there was more to life than just survival. There was living, and I didn't want to screw that up for her. The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from my thoughts. I checked the screen, and it was a message from Rose. "Emma wants to see you. Please come by when you get a chance." I stared at the message for a moment. I didn't know what I expected, but the thought of seeing her again sent a wave of warmth through me. Emma had become more than just a symbol of hope. She had become the reason I was trying to be a better man. I didn't know how long I could keep this up, but I knew I had to keep trying. For her. I finished my coffee, paid for it, and got back on the bike. As I revved the engine and headed toward Emma's house, I felt a new sense of purpose. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was living. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was looking for the next step. I pulled into the driveway at Rose's house, the engine quieting as I parked. The door opened before I could knock, and there was Emma, standing there with a grin on her face. "Jake," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I knew you'd come." I smiled back at her, my heart swelling with something I couldn't quite name. "You're right. I'm here." She pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, everything felt right. The world could be a messed up place, but in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't running. I had made my choice, and I was going to live with it. Whatever came next, I would face it. For Emma. For myself. I arrived at Emma's house, my mind racing as I parked my bike outside. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the quiet neighborhood. I turned off the engine, the bike's rumble fading into the distance, leaving behind only the sound of my footsteps. As I walked toward the porch, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the last few days. Everything had changed. Everything had to change. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding behind the shadows of my past. I was here, with Emma, and that's all that mattered. I knocked on the door, and within moments, Rose opened it. She gave me a look, as if measuring me, but then stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. "She's in the kitchen," Rose said quietly, her voice carrying a subtle note of concern. I nodded, walking through the small, cozy house toward the back. As I entered the kitchen, Emma looked up, her face lighting up when she saw me. She was sitting at the table, coloring in a book, her small hands carefully moving across the page. The sight of her made something shift inside me. She was the reason I was trying, the reason I was fighting so hard to leave behind the man I had been. "Hey, Emma," I said softly. She looked up, her eyes sparkling with that same innocence and trust she had always shown me. "Jake, you came," she exclaimed, a smile spreading across her face. "I'm glad you're here." I walked over to the table and sat down across from her. "I told you I would," I said with a small smile, though I felt the weight of the promise settle deep inside me. Emma continued coloring, her focus intense. "I was thinking," she said, breaking the silence. "About what you said. About making things right." Her voice was small, but there was a maturity in it that always surprised me. "You think you can really do it?" I stared at her for a moment, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, I didn't know if I could make it right. I didn't know if I could fix the mistakes I'd made, or undo the damage I'd caused. But I knew one thing. I had to try. For her. For myself. I don't know. I said finally, my voice soft. But I'm going to try. I have to. Emma stopped coloring for a moment, looking up at me with a seriousness that belied her years. I know you can, she said simply, as if the answer were obvious. It was strange, hearing her say it. But in her voice, I heard the truth I had been searching for all along. She believed in me, and that was more than enough to keep me going. Thank you, I said quietly, feeling a lump in my throat. Emma smiled at me again, the kind of smile that made everything seem right in the world. You're welcome. The rest of the evening passed quietly, the kind of peaceful evening I had never thought I would have. We sat at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. The sound of Emma's laughter filled the house, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I wasn't just a product of my past. I was here, with Emma, and that was enough. But as the night wore on, the nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. I knew Steele wasn't going to just let me walk away, and I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he came looking for me. I knew that sooner or later, the past would catch up with me. I couldn't outrun it forever. But for tonight, I pushed those thoughts aside. I was with Emma, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun had even fully risen. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. I walked outside, the cool morning air biting at my skin as I stood on the porch, looking out at the world in front of me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready. The sound of footsteps behind me made me turn. Emma was standing there, wrapped in a blanket, her small face peeking out. She had woken up early too, as if she knew I needed her. She walked over to me, her little feet patting softly against the ground, and stood next to me, looking out at the world with the same quiet intensity one felt inside. Are you going to leave again? She asked, her voice soft but full of concern. I crouched down to her level, my heart heavy. No, Emma. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying. I promised you that. Emma nodded, her face serious, but there was a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Good, she said, her voice filled with relief. Because I need you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was like the weight of everything. The mistakes, the regrets, the fear, all melted away in that moment. She needed me, and that was all the reason I needed to keep going. I'm here, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not going anywhere. Emma smiled then, the kind of smile that made everything feel like it was going to be okay. And in that moment, I believed it. I didn't know what the future held, but with Emma by my side, I knew I could face it. I woke up the next morning to the sound of a gentle knock on the door. The sun was barely up, but the quiet hum of the world outside reminded me that time never really stopped, no matter how much you tried to leave it behind. I rubbed my eyes and stretched, the memories of last night's promises still fresh in my mind. Emma had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a long day of laughter and light-hearted conversations. But my mind was still heavy, filled with thoughts of the future and the choices I had made. I had promised her I would stay. I had promised myself the same. The knock came again, a little more urgent this time. I got up, pulling on my jacket and stepping into the hallway. I opened the door to find Rose standing there, her expression tense, her eyes searching mine for something. Jake, she said softly, you need to see this. My heart skipped a beat as I followed her outside. There, parked at the end of the driveway, was a familiar motorcycle. The black leather and chrome gleamed under the early morning sun. It was a bike I had seen many times before, the unmistakable mark of a Hells Angels member. My stomach churned as I approached the bike, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. I had known it was coming. I had known I couldn't just walk away without consequences. The past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you ran. I turned to Rose, who was standing a few feet away, watching me closely. It's them, isn't it? She asked, her voice steady but filled with worry. I nodded slowly, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my head. Yeah, it's Steele and the others. Rose didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there with her arms crossed, her eyes locked on mine. She knew what this meant. She knew I was about to face the hardest choice of my life. You don't have to do this alone, you know, Rose said finally, her voice soft but strong. I looked at her, a rush of gratitude filling me. She was offering me more than just a place to stay. She was offering her support, her belief that I could do this. I took a deep breath and walked toward the bike. As I got closer, Steele emerged from the shadows, his cold eyes locking onto mine. The years hadn't changed him. He still looked the same, tall, intimidating, a presence that made the air around him seem thicker. He stepped forward, his boots thudding against the gravel. "Jake," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You thought you could just walk away? You thought you could just quit?" I didn't flinch. I wasn't that man anymore. I didn't have anything left to prove to him, or anyone else. "I'm done, Steele. I'm not coming back. I'm not one of you anymore." Steele's gaze hardened, his jaw tightening. He looked at me as though he were sizing me up, as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You think that's how it works? You think you just get to walk away without consequences?" His voice was harsh, the anger seeping through the cracks. "You made a deal with us, Jake. You made a choice. And now, you think you can just leave? It doesn't work like that." I stood my ground, my chest rising and falling with each breath, my mind clear despite the pounding in my head. "I don't owe you anything, Steele. I don't owe anyone anything. I've paid my dues." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over me. "That's where you're wrong. You owe me. You owe us." My heart pounded, but I didn't back down. "I don't owe you anything. Not anymore. I'm done." There was a long silence as Steele stared at me, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, I thought he might strike me, might try to make me see things his way. But then, to my surprise, he stepped back. "You've made your choice," he said, his voice cold. "But you should know this. You can't just walk away. Not without paying the price." With that, Steele turned and walked back to his bike, the rest of the crew following him, their eyes on me as they mounted their bikes and sped off into the distance. I watched them go, my heart heavy with the weight of their words. I knew it wasn't over. It wasn't just about them. It was about the choices I had made and the consequences of walking away from a life that had been mine for so long. But as I turned back to the house, I saw Emma standing at the door, watching me with those bright, trusting eyes. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't going back to that life. No matter what came next, I was staying. For her, for me, and for the chance to build something better. I walked back inside, closing the door behind me. The world outside was still uncertain, but inside, with Emma by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. I woke up the next morning with a sense of unease settling in my chest. The peaceful calm that had settled over the house the night before was gone, replaced by the sharp edge of uncertainty. Steele's words had stuck with me, echoing in my mind like a warning I couldn't shake. "You can't just walk away." I had made the choice to leave the Hells Angels behind, but I knew that decision came with consequences. The question was no longer if they would come after me, it was when. And I had no idea what I was going to do when that day came. As I stepped out of bed, I glanced over at the window. The morning light was just beginning to creep through, casting long shadows across the room. I could feel the weight of the past bearing down on me, but for the first time, it didn't seem as heavy. I had made the decision to stay, to be better for Emma, and that was enough to keep me going. I walked out into the living room where Emma was already sitting, drawing at the kitchen table. She was humming softly, completely lost in her world of colors and shapes. The sight of her, so innocent and unaffected by the world's troubles, reminded me of why I couldn't afford to go back to the man I had been. She was a child, yes, but in so many ways, she was wiser than I had ever been. "Good morning, Jake," she said, not looking up from her drawing. "Good morning, Emma," I said with a smile, though it didn't reach my eyes. "What are you working on?" She held up her drawing, a picture of a bike, but this one was different. It was colorful, full of life, not the menacing black and gray motorcycles that were associated with my past. It was a symbol of the new life I was trying to build. "It's a bike, just like yours," she said, grinning. "But I made it better." I chuckled, walking over to the table. "It's a great bike," I said, sitting down beside her. She slid the picture across the table to me, her face serious now. "I want you to keep it," she said. "I made it for you, so you'll always remember to be better." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was just a drawing, a simple gesture from a child, but in that moment, I felt like she had given me everything I needed. I took the picture and tucked it into my jacket pocket, the weight of it both comforting and overwhelming. I needed to be better for her. I couldn't let her down. After breakfast, I went to the garage, determined to do something productive, to focus on something that would keep my mind from wandering. The tools were familiar, the bike still waiting for me to fix them, But the garage felt different now. It was no longer a place to hide. It was a place to build. I was still working on the same motorcycle, the one that had been my escape in the past, but now it felt like it had a deeper purpose. I wasn't just fixing a bike. I was fixing myself. The morning passed quickly as I worked, but the familiar rumble of engines interrupted my focus. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag, my heart racing as I walked outside. There, parked just a few yards away, were two motorcycles. Steele and another man from the club were standing by them, their expressions unreadable. I froze for a moment, feeling the ground beneath me shift. They were here. I knew this moment was coming. Steele didn't waste any time. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning me with the same cold calculation he had always had. "Jake," he said, his voice low and even, "I warned you." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. "I'm not going back, Steele," I said, my voice firm. "I've made my decision." Steele looked me up and down, his expression hardening. "You think you can just walk away and live your life?" he asked. "You think we won't come after you?" His words were a threat, but they didn't hold the power they once did. I had made peace with the fact that the past would always be there, lurking in the background. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, meeting his gaze head-on. Steele didn't smile, didn't flinch, but for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't respect. It wasn't fear. It was something darker. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice colder than before. "You think you've walked away, but you haven't. Not really." He turned to leave, his words hanging in the air like a shadow. "You haven't heard the last of us." I watched as they mounted their bikes and rode off, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but I felt something inside me shift. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had made my choice, and no one, not Steele, not the Hells Angels, could take that away from me. As I stood there in the driveway, the sun rising higher in the sky, I knew what I had to do next. I had to keep moving forward. I wasn't going back to the man I was. I wasn't going back to the life I had left behind. I was moving forward, for Emma, for myself. And nothing was going to change that. I watched the dust settle in the driveway as Steele and his men rode off, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. The weight of the conversation lingered in the air like an unspoken promise. I knew it wasn't over. Steele's words haunted me. He had warned me, and I wasn't foolish enough to think he'd let me walk away that easily. But in that moment, standing there, the sun starting to climb higher in the sky, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life anymore. I turned and walked back into the house, my boots heavy on the porch steps. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, her back to me as she carefully colored a picture in her book. When I stepped inside, she didn't turn, but I could feel her sense of awareness. How she always seemed to know when I was nearby. "Jake," she said, her voice small but steady. "Are they gone?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, they're gone." She paused for a moment before looking up at me, her eyes bright and full of that same innocent trust she always showed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I stood there for a moment, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. She had no idea the weight of the world that had just passed me by. She was just a kid, and yet she made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could be something better. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady but softer than I expected. I'm just trying to figure things out." Emma put down her crayons and slid off the chair, walking toward me. She wrapped her small arms around my waist, hugging me tightly. For a moment, I felt like I could finally breathe, like the pressure of everything, of the life I had left behind, of the fear that was still haunting me, could just wash away. I placed a hand on her head, ruffling her hair gently. "Thank you, Emma," I whispered. "You make everything seem possible." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a kind of wisdom that felt so much bigger than her years. "You don't need to be perfect," she said quietly. "You just need to keep trying. And that's enough." Her words hit me harder than I expected. In all my years, in all the battles and pain, I had never thought about things like that. I had always been so focused on being strong, on winning, on surviving. But here she was, showing me a simple truth. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to keep trying. And that, it seemed, was enough. I crouched down, meeting her gaze, and smiled. "I'm going to keep trying, I promise." She smiled back at me, That same hopeful smile that had somehow broken through the darkness of my past. I know you will. I stood up, the decision settling deeper inside me. I wasn't going to let Steel, or the Hells Angels, or anyone else control my life. I was done running. I was done hiding. I was going to face whatever came next. I was going to face it for me. And for her. I spent the rest of the day in the garage, fixing bikes, cleaning up, doing the work that had once been my escape, but now felt like something more. It was a strange kind of peace, a peace I didn't know I could have. The day passed slowly, the quiet of the garage soothing in its own way. But as evening approached, I could feel the familiar pull of anxiety creeping back in. I knew what I had to do. The choice was no longer just about me. It was about Emma too. She had become the reason I wanted to be better. She was the one thing in my life that made me want to fight for something better. The phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me out of my thoughts. I walked over and picked it up. The message was from Rose. "Jake, you need to get over here. It's about Emma." My heart skipped a beat as I read the message, a feeling of dread settling over me. I grabbed my jacket and rushed out the door, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The ride to Rose's house felt like an eternity, my mind racing with worry. What could have happened? Was Emma okay? I parked my bike outside, my hands shaking as I ran to the door. Rose opened it before I could knock, her face pale, her eyes wide with concern. "It's Emma," she said, her voice tight. "She's not feeling well." I followed her inside, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma was sitting on the couch, her face pale and her body curled up under a blanket. She looked up at me when I entered, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Jake?" she whispered, her voice weak. "What's happening?" I knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her forehead. She was warm, too warm. "Hey, kiddo," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's okay. I'm here." Rose stood by, her hands wringing together as she watched us. "I don't know what's wrong," she said, her voice shaking. She started complaining of a headache, and then she just collapsed. I looked down at Emma, my heart sinking. She wasn't just sick, there was something more going on, and I didn't know what it was. I couldn't lose her. Not after everything we had been through. "We need to get her to the hospital," I said, my voice firm, though the fear clawing at my chest was almost suffocating. I helped Emma to her feet, supporting her as she leaned against me. She was small and fragile, and I realized just how much I had to protect her. As I helped her out the door, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I couldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. I drove as fast as I could, my mind racing with every passing second. The hospital was only a few miles away, but with each turn, each bump in the road, the fear grew stronger. Emma was slumped against me in the seat, her small body trembling, her face pale and flushed with fever. I kept telling myself that it would be okay, that we would get her the help she needed. But deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't just a simple illness. There was something else going on, something I couldn't see, but that I felt in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't sure what the doctors would say when we arrived, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't lose her. I couldn't. As I pulled into the emergency room parking lot, I slammed the brakes and rushed out of the car. The moment I opened the door, Emma's small, weak voice barely reached my ears. "Jake," she whispered, her hand reaching out for me. I grabbed her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm right here, Emma. You're going to be fine." But even I wasn't convinced. I helped her into the hospital, her body swaying with every step she took. The nurses quickly took over, rushing her into a room while I was left in the waiting area, pacing nervously. The minutes felt like hours, and each second stretched longer than the last. I kept thinking about the things I had left behind, the life I had walked away from, and how it had led me here. Was I doing the right thing? Had I made the right choice? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let the past take away my future. Not now. Not after everything Emma had shown me. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor walked into the waiting room. His expression was neutral, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Jake," he said, his voice calm but serious. I stood up, my heart racing in my chest. "How is she?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. The doctor sighed, his eyes softening as he spoke. "She's stable for now, but we've run some tests. We need to keep her here overnight for observation." I nodded, my body sagging with relief. "What's wrong with her?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. The doctor hesitated before answering, his face grave. We suspect it might be a viral infection, but we're still waiting on some results. The fever, the weakness, it's not uncommon, but we need to make sure there's nothing more serious going on. I felt a weight lift off my chest, but it was quickly replaced with something else, a growing sense of dread. What if there was something more serious? What if I had already waited too long? Can I see her? I asked. The doctor nodded and led me to Emma's room. She was lying in the bed, an IV in her arm, her small face pale and her eyes closed. I sat down beside her, gently brushing the hair from her forehead. "Hey, kiddo," I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. "I'm right here." Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she looked at me, a faint smile crossing her lips. "You came," she said softly, her voice weak but full of warmth. "Of course I came," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached out weakly, taking my hand in hers. "You promised," she whispered, her grip tightening just a little. The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I'm going to keep that promise." I sat there for a long time, holding her hand, watching her sleep. It was quiet in the room, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the calm before the storm, like everything had finally slowed down, like I had found something worth fighting for. I had spent so many years running from my past, from my mistakes, but now I was here. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had to protect. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew I was going to face it with Emma by my side. And no matter what came next, I wasn't going to let her down. Not again. The nurse came in to check on Emma, adjusting the IV and taking her vitals before leaving us alone again. I sat back in the chair, the weight of everything finally hitting me. I had chosen this path, chosen to leave behind the life I had known, to start something new. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about escaping my past. It was about building a future, a better one, with Emma. The sound of the machines around us was a constant hum in the background, but it was no longer a reminder of the chaos I had left behind. It was a reminder of how far I had come, and how far I was willing to go to protect the future I was building. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, more difficult choices, and obstacles I couldn't foresee. But I wasn't afraid. I had a purpose now, something bigger than myself. I had Emma, and for the first time, I knew that was enough.